All right, in the class then that we had on Tuesday, we were going over Chapter 1, and if you remember the stuff that was in here, we had the intro to web apps, we looked at a 2-page shopping cart application, we looked at the difference between static and dynamic web pages. All right, we talked about the 3 different environments, and I already hit on that with you as far as we're going to choose file system, which is the default. I did near the end talk a little bit about the components. That was right near the end, and we talked a little bit about, I mentioned that the CLR, the Common Language Runtime, is Microsoft's equivalent of the Java Virtual Machine. So that basically is where we stopped. And then I gave you that handout that's right here, and that was the program that's in your book on page 21. All right, and I asked you to create the basically the GUI for it. All right, so they go through here, and I'm not going to read to you, but we talked a little bit about this. The bottom line is there are several ways that you can maintain state in an ASP.NET program. We will use some of them, but not all of them. Some of them are done manually, and some of them are done automatically for you by the system. And again, if you'd never heard this term before, then shame on me, because you have to have an understanding of it. And that is system state. That makes sure that as you go between pages and as you move around through an application, that if you've got information that those different pages need to share, that they're able to do so. We're going to work with session state a lot in PHP, but it'll be later on in the semester, and in here, but it'll be more later on in the semester. So you'll get a chance to do it in both languages. Here they show the 5 different ways of doing it. I'm not going over any of them. You know, some people look at it and they say, well, profile, look at this. One profile can be maintained for each user of an application. Yes, you can do that. But there's some overhead with doing that, and there's some work involved in doing that. But it may make sense, especially if you've got an intranet type of application. It might make a lot of sense to do something like that. In a later chapter, we're also going to talk about caching. Am I right in assuming that if I mention the term caching, that everybody in here knows what I'm talking about? Is that correct? Okay. All right, so again, this is the future value application. As it says in here, and as we see right there, there's it working, and there is it after you click the clear button, and they actually did, I guess, put some validation. I didn't put any validation in because I forgot to do this last night, so I wrote it right before your 8 o'clock class. And mine doesn't line up pretty, but it works. It's very functional. So again, this was an image control right here, and you had to go in and what I did out on the P drive is I did unzip that on the P drive because I only had a zip version out there. So that image is out there, and you had to add that as an image control. This was an H1 tag. I put these in as label, 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 drop-down list, text box, and label, and a couple buttons. As far as the functionality, the drop-down list will have the numbers between 50 and 500 in increments of 50. The annual interest rate expects it to be either a whole number or a number with a decimal place, and the years. All right? And once you put in valid values for all of them, then click calculate. All right, notice in the second case, they've shown how you can put in some validation. All right, we can talk about that too. All right. There is a whole chapter, I think it's like chapter 8 or something like that, that's all on validation. So you're going to have a lot of chance to use validation and learn about validation. But we talked about this, and the main files that are in this program, not a whole heck of a lot of them when you look. So what I did was I went back and started this as an empty app. So we put in the images folder and added the ping file, which had the Muroc logo. And by default, when we added a web form, it was called default. You'll notice on the one that I created, I called it futurevalue.aspx. So the source code file is futurevalue.aspx.cs. All right, and again, I did not put in, sorry about that, but I did not put in the validation as they did. All right. So when they say let's look at the ASPX code, let's take a look at what's in here. This is in your book on page 25. I'm going to go over it first here, then we can actually look at the code. But I'm going to do both of them this way. I'm going to show it to you from the book and then bring the code up. All right. So a couple things that are in here. We're going to go over these more in future lectures, but just so you see it. This line right here is a very important line because this is the one time where it's considered not only okay, but that is actual ASPX, that's actual C# code that you're putting in an ASPX file. Did you hear what I said? That's regular code that you're putting in there. And since it's regular code that you're putting into an ASPX file, you have to surround it with these. And I guess when I showed you last time, I forgot about the @ sign. So it has to be a less than, percent sign, @ sign. Then at the end, it has to be percent greater than sign. All right. As far as the stuff that's in here, Mike, for example, since he took the VB.net class, if he was doing this in VB.net, it's not VB.net. You just say page language equals VB. All right. So it's the language that you're using for the application, in other words. All right. The auto event wire up, it gets confusing. All right, but literally it's talking about wiring the thing up. Bottom line is it's set to true by default, and there probably is never a reason to set it to false. You're going to see it. I think it's in the next chapter. They'll do a much better job of explaining it than I could. All right, this tells whether or not it's got an associated code file. And again, that code file should always be the same name as the .aspx file, but with a .cs extension if it's a C# file, and a .vb extension if it's a vb.net file. And the inherits we're also going to get to in the next chapter. One thing that's interesting, I want you to hear this, okay? This morning, I guess mainly probably because I wasn't paying good enough attention, all right? So I'll put that on me. There's your beginning HTML tag. There's your ending HTML tag, right? So everything that's in there is within the tags. Somehow this morning, I had that HTML tag right underneath the form tag, literally the ending tag. So what was happening is the thing still worked, but it flagged everything that was after that as being an error. And the other day when I went through this, I might have been doing the same thing because I remember some of them were flagged as being an error. As soon as I moved that, boom, everything went away. All right. And again, when you look at this, notice they've put in some inline, usually considered the worst type of CSS, but it's fine for right now. There's the image tag, there's the H1 tag, and notice they put everything into a table. I didn't do that. That's why theirs lines up pretty and mine doesn't. All right. So they put it into a table, and none of that stuff is important, except for when you look at this, notice that they have also set up a style for it. All right, and it's style, and the style is not shown, at least right here, and it's style 3. Okay. Also notice when you look in here that they've got widths set up. Okay, what you will not see on this stuff is you will not see widths. When you grab one of those standard controls that I showed you the other day and you drag it out there, you will not see a width. But if you go in and manually change the default width, then it'll add the width part. Does that make sense? So if you're using the default width, it won't show it. But if you change it, make it bigger, smaller, wider, higher, whatever, then it'll show it. All right, that's why they've got it, because they manually came in and did some stuff. I didn't do any of that. And also, because I've told you this before, I want to keep saying this, that what distinguishes a server-side control or one of those standard controls from an HTML control is a server-side control must have two things. Must have run at equals server, must have an ID, and the IDs must be unique. All right? And just so you know, the order in which you put these things doesn't matter at all. You could have width first, then ID, then run at equals, doesn't matter. All right? IntelliSense will kick in if you add them right here, you know, when you're in here. So when you start typing run at, for example, it'll come up and it'll say, you know, if you say run at equals, it'll come up with server. Be real leery of using the IntelliSense. The system expects that all of your tags will be in double quotes. IntelliSense doesn't always put double quotes in for you. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. All right, so just be leery of that. Now, what I do want to mention, because this is what's new here, now look what's here. All right, we've got here, literally that's the equivalent of some JavaScript. On click equals btn calculate click, but rather than calling JavaScript, it's going to be calling a routine that's written in C#, and you'll see it in just a second. Same thing in here for clear. All right, and this causes validation will go on in a different in a different chapter, but basically what's going to happen is we're telling it that we're handling the validation ourselves. All right, so we don't have to worry about that for right now. So if we look at the actual code that goes along with it, again, it's explained here, but I just want to show you the code. All right, some of this I started talking about last time, but again, we were so close to the end of the class that I want to go back and just spend a minute on it again. All right, so page load is just that. It's literally when the page loads. So the stuff that you see in this routine is stuff we typically would only want to have happen once. So in other words, when that page first loads, we want to fill this. So when you click the drop down, it's got in there 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350, 400, 450, and 500. Does that make sense? But we only want to fill it once. We don't want it to be refreshed every time. There's no reason for doing that. There's really no sense in doing that. That's why we're putting it in page load. So what we're saying here is this line of code literally means, are we posting the form back to the server? The only time that won't be true is the first time we bring it up. We're not posting it back because we haven't posted it yet. All right? So what they're saying is just the first time when you actually are loading this program into memory, that's when you should fill this thing up. Other than that, you don't have to do it again. So as we go through this, you'll see sometimes you'll see no code put in his post back. Sometimes you will see code put in there. And again, IntelliSense will kick in. So if you type if and then put the parenthesis in there not, and then you put is P, boom, the is post back will come up and show for you. All right. So again, if it's the first time, fill up that drop-down list. This, as you'd guess, that's what you're going to do if you click the calculate button. That's what you're going to do if you click the clear button. And when you click the calculate button, you call the calculate future value routine. All right, so I want to go over each one of these three routines. We'll go back and we'll run the program, and then we'll take a look at it, okay? And it's actually, I'm not saying this, I screwed up. I didn't put the validation in. So I'm going to put it in for you so you can kind of see it in action, so to speak. You understand what I'm saying? So it won't look exactly like it does in the book. I'm not saying it'll be better or it'll be worse, but just so you can see the stuff that's in there. All right, you can see how you add validation. Hopefully I'll remember it because it's been a while since I've done it, but I'm not worried about it. All right, so what this says, the if is valid, literally what that means is that what you put in here, here, and here has passed validation checks. What does that mean? Well, this, you're not going to have any choice because the way they wrote it, it defaults to 50, and when you click clear, it goes to 50, which is the first value. So that one's always okay. You don't have to worry about that one. But it's these two. They have to be numeric, and I think the way they've got it set up is like the interest rate has to be between 0 and 20 or something like that, so you can put parameters in there. And the years are like between 10 and 50 or something like that. I mean, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for you to put 1,000 years in there. You know what I'm saying? Because you wouldn't be around to see that to fruition anyway. But if you were starting up a company and you knew it was a family company, all right, you might want to do something like that. But then you just have to go in and you have to change the values that are put in the validation controls. All right, so if the validation, those three things passed, then notice what we're doing. We're creating three, don't worry about these yet, but we're creating three variables. Monthly investment, interest rate, all right, and then years. Okay, those three things. And so what do those correspond to? Monthly investment, interest rate, and years, right? Because remember, how do those go in there? They're strings, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to convert them from strings. We're going to do it into either integers or into decimal. Does that make sense? All right. And you'll notice there's a convert to int 32. I believe there's also a 16, and I believe there's also a 64. The recommendation is that you use the 32 just in case the machine on which the program is being run is a 32-bit machine. All right, because it can be problematic to run it on a 64. You know, if you set it to 64 to run it on a 32-bit machine. All right, that's why I believe the author uses that in here. So all we're doing is we're taking here those three values that we put in the three respective text boxes, the ones that we're validating, and we're setting them either equal to an integer or a decimal for the rate or an integer for the years. So when we're putting in a monthly investment, you can put $1,010, but you can't put in $1,010.03. That makes sense? You got to round up or down. All right. Same kind of thing for years. You can't do a partial year. If you wanted to do that, you could, but then you'd have to convert those into decimal or double or whatever. All right. All right. Then this is the future value. So that thing right there is what you're going to end up creating and putting in here. All right. So that's what that is. So that hasn't even been set yet. So when we set that, we're just saying that equals, notice this, remember that from Java? Same kind of thing, current object. So this dot calculate future value. So we're calling that function down here. All right, and we're passing it in the monthly investment, which we just set, the yearly interest rate, which we just set, and the years, which we just set. So we're passing it in an int, a decimal, and an int. And then once that returns, we're stuffing the value into future value, and we're going to copy that. We're going to convert it to a string with currency format, and then stick it right in there. Does all that make sense? Just so you know, you see where it says LBL future value here? That shows when you're in design mode, but you can tell by looking at that you have not put anything in for that label. There's no value. So it automatically, when you're in design mode like that, it shows you the name of the control. But when you run it, it's invisible. There won't be anything there. All right, just so you're aware of that. All right, so then we come down here. Let's do the easy one first. This is just a clear routine. That says set our selected index to 0, which means set it back to 50. Remember, the first element is element 0. If we didn't want anything set, we could set it to -1. We don't want to do that way, because setting it to 1, we never have to do validation on it technically. If the person meant to say 50, but they put in 100, we don't know that. We can't validate for that anyway. You can't validate for ignorance. Not that I know of, at least. All right, and the other ones, we're just taking those the 3 text boxes and we're setting them equal to double quote, double quote. So this is just a formula for future value. That's all I can tell you. All right, so we need the number of months, which is the number of years that we just passed in times 12, and we need the interest rate. But remember, if you put in 6% and you put it in the program, they have you put it in like this. All right, so this is that line that you see right here where I've got the mouse resting. That's going to do this. 6.0 divided by, what does it do first? 12 divided by 100. So this is your monthly, but 6.0, now that's 0.5, right? Because that's it divided by 12. But that's it over a year. All right, and it's over a month, but it's formatted incorrectly. We want it at 100 because the only way to get around that, if you say that's too much work, if you don't want them to do this, then you make them have to enter it like that. Then you don't have to do this. But most people are more comfortable entering a whole number and letting the machine do the calculation for them. So that's going to take that and divide it by 100, so it'll now be this for the calculation. Does all that make sense? All right. Why? Because that's the formula that you have to use. This literally, it's not my formula, all right? It's a future value formula. I mean, you could go in and Google future value formula. All right. We'll do a little bit of work in one of the programs, or probably do some work with like loan amortization or something, all right, or payments or something like that. I've had people do that for the last few years. Then once we figure it out, when we fall out of the loop, it's figuring out the future value, okay? And then once it gets all the way through it and it gets finished, then we just return that future value right there. That gets stuffed into here. That gets converted to a string in currency format and put into that thing that I just showed you that previously was blank. Does all that make sense? Does all the code that's in there make sense? Is there any code that's in there that doesn't make sense? All right. So what you'll see then, if I go back into the virtual desktop, well, we don't need that anymore, do we? I think I'm going to keep some of that up. Yeah. All right. So when you go back into the virtual desktop and I come through here and start up Visual Studio, again, the thing with today's date on it has a future value after and a future value before. Those are ones I created. So I'm going to grab the after one and make a couple changes to it just so you can see them. All right. When this comes up, you never need the start page unless you decide you want to open or start a project from here. You can close it. It's no big thing one way or the other. All right. So I'm going to come through here, do a file, open, website. This is the way that you typically will open it. All right. So I want future value. Let's do the before one first. Click open. Here's my stuff, so to speak. All right. So I just literally took what was in the book, but I did key it in. Again, I didn't put it in a table. So what you'll see when I run this is the before picture. So the interface has been created. All right. There's an interface, but I got this morning too. Yeah. And for some reason it was stuck, for lack of better words. Yeah. And it's happened twice now. It never happened to me before ever, but it's happened twice. So what I did was I came over here and I said close that, and then once I did that, then it worked, but we'll see in just a second. And this, okay, future value is 1 before 1. Is it still running? No. All right. But look, right here, I'll just show you the. So that's what it looks like. I didn't put any of the CSS in or anything else. Okay. So right now in the before picture, if you go over here, there's source, but all the source. This is where I told you I had the HTML tag that was actually up right underneath right here under the form tag. Okay. So I'm not sure why that's when you try to bring that up. Why it's there's one thing I can check though. We'll see. No, it is. It's run. There it is. So if you bring up the before, that's what it does. You can enter stuff in here. There's nothing here. You can click calculator clear, but they don't do anything. All right. So I'm going to get rid of that one because it's not doing us much good. But just so you could see that. I haven't made any changes. My recommendation is if you bring this up and you don't make any changes, don't save it. All right. But I'm going to bring the other one up now. And that's the after picture. So using what they have in the book on page, I think it's 21. Yep. I'll just do that. And this is something we're going to see in a later chapter, but I want you to see this. So if you don't look up here for a second at the screen, let's say that I had a bunch of different files. All right, in here I had a lot of different ASPX files. You with me? So I've got a bunch of those. All right. If I want to make sure that the one that starts is this one, I right mouse click on it and I choose set a start page. Why is that important? Because if the first one is a form that's calling something else, but I don't want to use the form, I just want to call it directly, I can choose any of my ASPX files and have them run as the start page if I want to do that. All right, this is also, as you see in here, notice I've got Firefox set as my default browser, but view in browser, here's a real good, there's a way that you can change it. I'm going to show you in a second. What do you think is the default browser for these? What's that? YI8. Because it's a Microsoft product. All right, so that's what you're going to get by default. So 50, there's the one. Again, we filled that up once. They want 50 in here. It's 6.0. And it's 10. If I click calculate, there's our thing. There's our answer. Again, they put it in a table, and that's why theirs looks pretty and mine doesn't. But it's functional. The clear button works. Everybody cool with that? Everybody understand that? All right, so I want to show you a little bit of validation. Like I said, I'm a little rusty. That's not an excuse. I hope I don't screw anything up, but we'll find out. I think the reason I'm getting that is it's that file. That's those solution files that are in there. I think that's what's screwing it up, and especially that one. I don't even know what that is, so I'm getting rid of that. Now, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I have never seen a solution file put in there before. It's there when you save it, but it's in your folder, but I've never seen it there before. That might be something new in 2013. I don't know. All right, so let's bring the file up and take a look at it. Here's your code. I don't want to talk about the code right now. All right, Instead, I want to go back to the ASPX file, which is what you've seen here. As I showed you last time, design mode, source mode, split mode. You know, it's just the 3 buttons down here. You work with the one that you're most comfortable with, okay? So the first thing I want to do is, and again, I'm coming up with these. With what I'm telling you right now, that's interesting. It says LBL number of years. That's no problem. But the first thing I want to do is I want to set the interest rate. In other words, I want to make sure that the interest rate, I'm going to go back a step. Would you agree that when you look in here, when we look at the stuff that's in there, the monthly investment, the interest rate, the number of years, would everybody agree with this? Those should all be required. Everybody agree with that? I would say so. Now, like I said, one way that you can require it is through your code. That if the numbers that are in there are 50, 100, etc., up till 500, you can set it up on page load that it has maybe index 0, so it's at 50, okay? And when we cleared it, remember we set it to selected index equals 0. So you could do that and force it. And there should be no way they can ever screw that up. But in here, we could set it up, and for, let's say for an interest rate, I'm just making these numbers up. Let's say that, well, you can borrow from Dad and have a 0% interest rate, or you can borrow from Guido. And we'll say with Guido, it's a 20% interest rate, okay? So we'll have our minimum and our maximum between 0 and 20. So not only will it be required, but it must be between 0% and 20%, okay? The number of years. We'll say that maybe you did something when somebody was really, really young, maybe when they were a baby, and we'll just pretend they could live 100 years. So we'll say that the minimum number of years will be 1, the maximum will be 100. Does all that make sense? All right, so I want to put in validation that does that. That's what I want to show you right now. All right, so, well, how do we do that? Well, the first thing that we do is notice that we've got a bunch of different kinds of controls here, and a lot of them will probably make sense to you as we get on. Standard, I've shown you a few of them already, and you used them when you were doing this. Data is for database stuff. Navigation is for when you're building site maps and the like. Login is for just that. Never used web parts. Sorry, so I can't lie and blow some BS at you. Ajax is if you're using Ajax, you want to do some partial page refreshes. Dynamic data also deals at least somewhat with databases. All right. The reporting is that crystal report stuff I showed you. The HTML is what I showed you. Again, that's the client side controls. But again, that makes sense? That'd be the one we'd want? All right. Now, when you put these in, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this stuff. So what I'm telling you right now is I'm actually giving you some information that's like in chapter, I think it's 8. Nope. This is what I'm showing you is all the stuff that's in chapter 7. So why are you showing us now, Jeff? In case you want to validate directly, you're able to do that now. All right? If I give you an assignment and it asks for validation, I'll expect you to do it. If it doesn't ask for it, it's nice if you do it, but all you have to do is meet the minimal requirements. All right? So one thing on this, notice the first thing that's here is a validation summary. And hopefully it makes sense to you. That's exactly what it is. So for instance, if I want all the errors that I have to appear, let's say at the very bottom underneath this, I can grab one of these and drag it down there. Does that make sense? Or I can set it up that my individual errors appear over here, or I can do both. All right? Now, one of the reasons that they set this up, and they set this up using a table, I believe it's one of the reasons, and again, I can go back and do it if I want, but then your error stuff will line up pretty nice. The way I've got it, this is all different sizes. It may look a little funky on the screen when I do the error stuff. That's why a lot of times you use tables in here. So your error messages and everything look real nice. I'm not going to worry about it right now. I'll just grab a validation summary and I'll drag it down here. And right now, what is this? Error message? What? No. It's showing you the way it's going to look right now. So in other words, it's going to give you a list. It's going to give you a list of error messages, and they'll be in a list, an unordered list that have the little disk. There is the icon. Does that make sense? All right, well, let's say I don't like that. I can go over here, and this does have some stuff associated with it. All right, border color, back color, etc. Well, the one I'm going to use is I'm going to use the 4 color, which is the color of my font. Why? Because I want their errors. So being a good little boy, I want them to display in red. All right, and if you notice, immediate feedback, right? You can do that with CSS if you want, but that to me is the easiest way to do it. All right, now if I run the program, nothing's going to look different and nothing's going to show because I haven't actually put validation in yet. Does that make sense? All right, so we'll start with this one. There's not a whole lot I can do in here when you think about it. I guess I could say, well, it's a required field, and if there's somehow somebody tried to break that, so I can go and I can grab required field validator. And most people think, well, notice where I put it. I tried sticking it over there, but since it's not in a table, it stuck it underneath there. See that? And most people think, well, it's smart enough that it knows that it's linking it with this. No, it's not smart. This is a very stupid control. Just so you know that. It's a very dumb control. So I'm coming over here, and I have to come in, and I have to say the static and dynamic, all right? Notice that it's static by default. That means always display it, whether it's set or not. Dynamic means, and let me correct that. I'm going to change it to dynamic. And dynamic basically says only allow room for it if you need the room for it. But if I have like 3 different, let's say I'm doing 3 different validations and I want them all to appear right to the right of the field, if I make them static, if the 3rd one is there and the first 2 aren't, it's going to be pushed way over because it allows the room for the first 2 even though you're not using them. So you'll almost always set that to dynamic, just so you're aware of that. All right? Okay. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to click over here. I think this is right. Well, there's a way, I got to remember what it is. Now, otherwise, I'll go back and I'll look. So I'm going to click on here. Required field value. The first thing you might want to do, and I know you asked this question, I think, Mike, it was you yesterday. With these, this is one time I would suggest not putting like RFV for required field validator. What most people do in this case is, for instance, what am I validating here? I'm validating the, what is that thing called? Monthly investment. So most people will call this something like required field validator monthly investment. Now it makes for a really long name. I understand that. But if you notice, if we go back into our design mode, source mode I should say, see how it already added that for us. And you can add it in here too. You can grab those controls that are there and just drag them in here, because some people like to add them right in their source, because then they can put them more exactly where they want them to go. All right. Let's see if this helps me at all. So I don't know if it will or not. So no. All right. Like I said, worst case, I'll go back and take a look at it. So there's my required field validator. I don't know why it moved, but it did. And that's a nice thing. Again, notice some of the stuff I can do if I want to, border, color, etc., style. I don't ever do any of that. That's what I want. Control to validate. All right, click here. What does it show me? Every control which possibly could be validated, or any one of the 3, right? Well, now it's associated with that one. All right, and something fairly big just happened here, just so you know. What do I mean? Okay, so now when I run it, if it was possible, it isn't, but if it was possible to choose some, keep this blank, now I would get an error. Does that make sense? All right. Won't be able to show you because programmatically we set it up so you can't do that. All right, but you're going to see it in just a minute. Now, the other thing is, we could go and be even more anal about this and check some other stuff. We could do that, but since it's in a drop-down list, typically the amount the amount that you do, the amount of validation you do on a drop-down list is maybe make it required. And why would you make it required? Well, you can set it up. Did you ever see a drop-down list for states that say please select a state, and that's the first option. Otherwise, it's Alabama because that one comes first. All right. But if you have please require a state, you can check that programmatically. And if they haven't chosen anything, it's still at please choose a state. Then if you've got a required field validator there, it'll be kicked off. All right. Now, a lot of times what people do right here is when you come back over here and you've got this, and we go to required field validator, all right, that they come over here and where it says error message, it puts a generic message in there that says required field validator, which doesn't help very much. All right. So the error message, what I'm going to put in here for now is I'm literally just going to put an asterisk in there. All right. And see how it changed? Now I could put a thing on the top that says these fields are required. I could do all sorts of stuff. I can click on here, and like we did before, this has got a font associated with it also, so I can go to 4-color. I can use that same red I had before. That usually is the old danger type of signal. So you might say, well, why would I want to do that? Because if you set it over here and you actually set it to an asterisk, what's supposed to happen, and we're going to find out if I'm right or not, is it's supposed to automatically fill the error in there in your validation summary. So what I'm saying is, what would you rather have? Would you rather have the error messages appear up on top for each thing that's potentially wrong, or would you rather have them appear at the bottom? See what I'm saying? All right. So that's the first one. So we go to the second one. In fact, what I'm going to do, just kind of to make it a little quicker here, because I don't want to waste your whole period doing this, is I'm going to go to the required field validator, and I'm going to set one for the interest rate and for the number of years. All right. Then I'll go back to this one here, and the first thing I'll do is, again, go back up to the name, required field validator, and we'll set that one to annual interest rate. Oops, interest rate. All right, and we'll set this one over here, we'll set it to required field validator number of years. All right, so we've got that stuff in there. So those are both required now. All right, but they're not associated with the controls yet. So we have to go back and click on the control, find the control to validate, or was it on here? And find the control to validate. There you go. And now that's going to be what? The annual interest rate. And this one over here will do the same thing, and this will be the number of years. Does that make sense? I mean, is that pretty simplistic to everybody? All right. So again, I can come back here, and just like we did before, I can come back and I can put in a 4-color, and I can do all sorts of different things here. I can even, if I want to, I can leave this blank if I do want to. Now, if I do want to associate a CSS class with it, makes it real hard. There is a property called CSS class. So you can do that and associate your own class with it too if you want to do that. All right? But I want to show you the other validations, and they're the ones that I just mentioned. Now, the first one, I'm going to throw this in here, but I'm going to remove it. We're not doing it. Okay? I'm just showing you this as an example. I'm going to come over here and put in a required field validator. I'm sorry, a regular expression validator. Okay? I'm just putting that in there just so you see this. All right? So if we go in there, and this is where, like I said, it's been a while since I've looked at this, so sorry about that. Theme, displays, they're still static, which I should have set the other one to. There's still control to validate, but there is some kind of a pattern thing that's in here, and I don't know where it is right now. But the point is, what it'll do is if you open this up, they have some built-in regular expression validation. So they have one for social security number, one for telephone, one for email. There's like 4 or 5, and you can create your own pattern also. Does that make sense? So when we get to chapter 7, we'll go through that. All right. So, but what I want in here, well, what do I want? Let's see. Validation, I got that. Well, this one doesn't look bad. Range validator. I already said this, that what do I want? Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to come over to this range validator, and I want to go to control to validate, and I want it to be annual interest rate. All right. Now, a couple things, because the author doesn't do a stellar job in here of some of what I'm about to show you. All right. So I come down in here. Okay. Minimum value. Well, what did we say? That the minimum interest rate we'd make 0, and the maximum interest, I'm sorry, that's the maximum. we said we'd make that 20, and the minimum, we'd make 0. That should be pretty self-evident as far as what's going on in there. All right. Now, again, just to show you, if I want to, I can put the error message right here. And I can say, please enter an annual interest rate between 0 and 20. And then I just did 0% and 20%. I can do that. Put my own error right there. That'll work just fine if I do that. It'll be a long error, but I can do that. But the other thing is, I think it's in here. Let's see. This is it. And if I didn't tell you this now, telling it to you now, when we get to that point, it'll make more sense. Notice what the default is. You don't want that to be string. Because if you leave it at the default, instead of checking for 0 and 20, it's checking for double quote, 0, double quote, and double quote, 20, double quote. We want this to be type integer. All right, or, I mean, what was that one? Is that, no, that's the number of years. So we will probably want it to be a double. All right, because remember it was 6.0. So I'm just showing you the kind of stuff that you'd put in there. Now notice, if I go and I come back in, let me go back. I don't know if I associated this one. All right, so I want to go into control to validate. Yes, I did. All right, and again, as I mentioned, with all of these, you should, when you're doing this stuff, set the display to dynamic. The author mentions it, but it's one of those things that the author mentions, but as the saying goes, in passing. So you might not have even noticed it. So I'm going to make this one dynamic, and I'm going to go and make this one dynamic. All right. I'm going to save, and I'm going to run it again. Good news is, to start with, it looks like I was going to say I don't have any errors, but I do. Unobtrusive validation mode requires a script resource mapping for jQuery. Please add, I'll tell you what that is. If we had, since we created this as an empty project, it didn't bring in the jQuery folder that it automatically brings in. Why is that important? What do you think they're using to do the validation? That's exactly right. So I guess I can't show it to you, because by that time we'll be using different kinds of files. There's a way to bring it in, but I don't remember what it is. You got to go over to one of their packages that's called NuGet, and you've got to load it in. All right, now I don't want to do that right now. But the good news is, even if I remove this stuff now, I at least showed you a little bit of validation. All right, so let me get rid of all the stuff that's in here, because if I don't, the stuff won't run. And the other thing I want to change is that there's no way that should say that. So go over here, go back to my source mode, and no, I don't. I want the ID to be that, but I want the text to be number of years. That's the problem when you use a lot of copy and paste. You do silly things like I just did. All right, and you know, most of the stuff that's in here, you're going to catch on really fast, and it's not going to be that difficult. But I will tell you the truth, I'll be nitpicky. And if they tell you to do something, I expect you to do it. Those are your minimum requirements. If you want to go, if Kelly says, well, I read chapter 7 already, and I want to put in those, even though it didn't say we had to do validation, I want to put it in. That's cool. Then put it in. That's really good that you're doing that. But you don't have to. Get rid of that. Get rid of this also. All right, now it pretty much looks the same way. Again, in the book, they use some inline CSS right there that I didn't use. So hopefully I didn't break anything, but it's always good. And you know, it's funny. I really was trying to impress upon the people, the first year people, yesterday, but I'm saying this again to you also. When you're building this, and this is the way I built it, believe it or not, put in a couple things, then test it. Put in a couple more things, and then test it. Don't sit there, even if you got the code, don't write all the code and then test it. Do it incrementally. Because not if, but you are going to eventually, it's when you're going to have errors. Why sit there and have all this code there when you can build it incrementally, be pretty sure that works, and then go on and do this, and then if there's an error, you know right where to go to. If you decide you want to move your code all over the place, that's your call. I could care less. All right, I can read it either way. So it was 6%, and it was 50 years. So it still works. Well, that doesn't exactly, I think it's because I put something else in there, and the clear still works. All right, so I'm not worried about it. but is everything that we went over in the first chapter, how to build that interface. And Teresa has probably the least amount of experience. She hasn't taken the 142 class yet. And she showed me, did a really good job. She showed me on Tuesday, she already built her interface. All right, anyone else, anybody have any problem either with the interface or with the code that was associated with it? Go ahead. This? All right, just so you know, and Kelly, you'd asked about this, so I want to show this to you. All right, what I'm going to do, it's going to look a little weird. Just for a second, I'm going to remove that. Okay, and then I'm going to add it back. There's a reason I'm doing it. I'll show you in a second. All right, so I just removed it, and I'm going to come back into my standard tools again. I'm going to go back down to drop-down list, and so I'm sure I won't have any problems. I want to change the name right away. All right, so it was DDL monthly investment. All right, and this is what I want to show you. We wrote code, right, to fill that thing up, correct? When we wrote that code, we could have just as easily, some controls like drop-down lists, etc. You see that little greater than sign there, that little arrow that's pointing? That's a smart tag. And if I click the smart tag, if I wanted to, I could fill that list up myself. That's what you do here. So I could put in 50, etc. I could keep doing it. You can do that. We did it programmatically, but you could do it that way also. All right? And there's even yet another way that you can do it. Say you'd never heard of that before. All right? Well, then you can come in here and the items, if you click that ellipsis, it brings up the same thing. They decided to do it with code. All right? Should you do it with code? Well, if you're filling it with numbers like that, that would make sense. All right? If you were filling it in with names, ideally somebody would have provided you a file that had the names in it, and you dig through that file. Really, the worst case, unless you're putting in something that's fairly simple, all right, is to do it programmatically. It's the safest way of doing it. But if you don't agree with that and you want to manually put them in, you could have done that too. All right, now to go back to what Mike was talking about, a couple things. First, let's go, and as always, it's either in here, it's either in the interface, or it's in the code. So let's go back to the code. All right, why did I get the curlies? No, it does. I put it back in. But I haven't refreshed and saved since then. So as far as the system is concerned, I removed it, so it's referring to something that doesn't exist. All right. I would say I would check and make sure that you put in here is not postback rather than is postback. All right. If you say, well, no, I did it. I've got it typed in exactly like this. All right. Then I'd go back over to here, and I'd go back into source mode, and I would look and make sure that this is set up looking something like this. And that you have an ID. Oh, look, that's where it's screwed up. See what I call it? I didn't call it monthly investment. I called it month investment. It's great when I make errors because I could always turn around and say, oh, I did that on purpose to show you that. No, I did it because I was typing too fast. All right. And you might want to make sure of that. You know, you make sure your names are correct between what you called it in code, etc. So now if I jump back into my code, that was why I got the squiggles. But if you look at all the stuff I just told you, Mike, and you still have an error, then I'm not going to go real much longer after, you know, we're going to take a break in just a second. And I'm going to give you some time to just play with this stuff. All right? Questions on anything else that we can just answer in front of everybody? All right, then let's take a break. And what I want to do after the break, we've gone through everything that's in Chapter 1 now. So what I want to do is kind of give you a prelude, so to speak. I want to spend, when we come back, it's 11. We'll come back at 11:10, and I'm going to go till no later than 11:30, and I'm going to quickly go over Chapter 2 and the material that we're going to cover. All right? And then after that, I'm going to give you the rest of the period. You can play with this, and you can do whatever. Hopefully Mike will have his fix by then, etc. You don't have to turn this in. If you decide you don't want to keep it, you don't have to. I'd recommend you keep it. All right, and you know that way you've got something to go back to and take a look at at a later time. So let's take a break. Again, we'll come back at 11:10. All right. Well, I can. Do you have it up right now? I can take a look at it, even if you're leaving for break. That's not a problem.